Hello, I'm Jon Sermon, and if you've been watching my previous two efforts over the last couple of days, you already know that I'm a church minister, leading two churches in Suffolk, in Lowestoft and in Halesworth, and also chair of Churches Together in the Blythe Valley area that includes Halesworth. Now, another way that some of you already know me is that I am chair of trustees of a small UK charity called Romans 111 Trust, and our role is mutual encouragement between the churches in the UK and in Africa. And in particular, we work very closely with a number of colleagues in Uganda, where we also run a pastor training scheme. So I'm going to be offering today's message of encouragement to the church locally and more widely, and also to the Ugandans and the supporters of Romans 111 Trust. What I've been saying before continues, that I felt it was appropriate to record messages of encouragement whilst we are in such a difficult position because of the coronavirus, COVID-19. And as far as the day-to-day life of the church is concerned, it's very similar in Uganda to what it is here in the UK, in that lockdown procedures mean that we cannot gather physically in the big congregations in the church buildings. And while we can't do that, we all do what we can in ways of trying to encourage and support one another remotely, so that, for example, we in the churches here are running interactive worship events on Sundays and other days through Zoom. But by going onto YouTube as well, I'm hopefully able to reach people who can't access that. Now, it so happens this morning I was invited, along with others, to a prayer session on Zoom by another ministry. Local to us here in Halesworth is a place called New Chapel Farm, where an informal ministry setup provides support to churches and Christian workers and all sorts. And they were having a prayer day today. My wife Ruth and I were able to be part of it. And I want to bring you some of what came out of that in terms of a message from the Bible. We were looking at the opening of the book of Isaiah in the Old Testament, chapter 61. And it starts with these words: "The Spirit of the Sovereign Lord is on me, because the Lord has anointed me to preach good news to the poor. He has sent me to bind up the brokenhearted, to proclaim freedom to the captives and release from darkness to prisoners, to proclaim the year of the Lord's favour." Now, many of you will recognise that that's exactly the extract that Jesus read in the synagogue in Capernaum, which is recorded in Luke's Gospel, chapter 4. And he preached on that, explaining that the hope of God's intervention that this passage was talking about, it had come true even in their hearing, because he, the Messiah, God with us, was there. Now, I want us to look a little further on. That was from verses 1 and 2, and we didn't quite finish verse 2. Picking up in the second half of verse 3, however, in the beginning of verse 3, to provide for those who grieve. God's presence through Jesus Christ is to provide for those who grieve. And it goes on to say, to bestow on them a crown of beauty instead of ashes, the oil of gladness instead of mourning, and a garment of praise instead of despair. Now, that sounds familiar, doesn't it? A lot of our experience at the moment is a bit like ashes, and mourning, and despair. Yet God's promise is to transform that. This is why I'm encouraging us to explore prayer, even if you're new to it and you don't pray typically. Because actually getting to know God more personally is an invitation through Jesus Christ to anyone. And it's what puts us in a position to experience some of this, that although our circumstances are so hard, and there is despair and there is mourning, even so, God can transform us. Now, I know many of you are facing bereavement, despair because of being restricted from normal activities to try and control the spread of the virus, and maybe feeling despondent. Even within this period of lockdown, I too have been in the position of bereavement. My mum died 2.5 years ago. I nearly had to return early from a mission trip to Uganda when she was seriously ill. She revived a bit and we had some good time together once I was back, but then she died. My dad died at the beginning of the lockdown, not from coronavirus, from other causes, just short of his 90th birthday. Now, whether your circumstances are similar or different, how we experience grief is different for different people. So nobody can say, I know how you feel. But I know how I feel, and I know how relying on my relationship with God helps lift me and take me through. And I am experiencing some of this oil of gladness instead of mourning, and a garment of praise instead of a spirit of despair. And that's my prayer for all of you who watch this and listen to me, that you too will experience that. And God, through Jesus Christ, will be honoured as a result. The verses go on to say, of the people who experience this, they will be called oaks of righteousness, a planting of the Lord for the display of his splendour. When we experience being transformed out of despair by God's presence, that displays his splendour. Thank you for joining me again. God bless you all.